Good afternoon. Today I am filming what may be the hardest video for any book lover to ever film, and that is my top 10 favorite series of all time. It took me a few weeks to kind of solidify this list because I've been a big reader literally since I could read, and so there's a ton of series that had a huge impact on me as a kid, and I wasn't sure how many of my childhood series to include on this list versus series that I've enjoyed as an adult versus ones that I feel like have strong literary merit versus ones that I heavily enjoyed but don't think about too often, and it was just so hard to kind of narrow down my constraints. But in the end, this list is pretty much just vibes, and so I think I'm leaning more heavily into series that had a big impact on the way that I look at the world, whether they have any sort of literary or long-term merit at all, and rereadability is a huge thing for me. A lot of series I love and I've never touched ever again, whereas I'm pretty sure every book on this list I have reread multiple times or plan on rereading in the future, and so those were the two things that were the most important for me when I was determining this list. And without further ado, I guess we'll get started. At number 10, I have the Ranger's Apprentice series. My dad actually started reading the series to me when I was a kid, and I think we read through all 10 books together, and then once the series started releasing even more books than that, I started reading them on my own. I've reread them multiple times as a kid into my young teen years. I think I even reread them at one point in high school, and this follows a young boy named Will who is an orphan, and he gets pretty much adopted by a ranger named Halt, and not really adopted, but he's going to train to become a ranger, and they're basically like warriors slash spies slash assassins, except for I don't think they really kill too many people because it's kid series. But I just love any books that have any sort of training or academy based trope, and this series kind of exemplifies that. I just thought that the Rangers were really cool. The author did a great job of kind of forming friendships between all of the characters, and it's something that I just heavily enjoyed reading. I heavily enjoyed rereading, and I think I would still enjoy rereading them even as an adult, even though I haven't in a few years, but I think it settles pretty easily into my number 10 favorite series of all time. Now, moving on to number 9. This is a series that I did not really know where to put, and that is Harry Potter. I think I just can't not put Harry Potter on my list because I think I've reread those books throughout my life more than any other series on the planet, and that's just how it is. I think that my interest in Harry Potter has waned significantly with all of the stuff that's been happening over the last few years with J.K. Rowling, but I cannot just completely ignore the impact that Harry Potter had on me as a reader and continues to have on me throughout my life, and I don't think that will ever go away even if I don't reread them quite as much as I used to. Obviously, everyone knows what Harry Potter's about. It fulfills the perfect trope of the school-based learning. I just think all of the characters are so interesting. There was just something so magical about growing up in the era of Harry Potter, like as the books were releasing. I think I was 10 when the last book came out, so I actually remember it, and yeah, it was just like a fantastic series to grow up with, and I'm so happy that I got to experience it at the time that I did. Now we have number 8, and that is the Red Sister series. This is the second book, Grey Sister. I couldn't find the first book for some reason, so I just picked up the second one. This series is by Mark Lawrence, and it follows a convent of nuns, but those nuns are not the type of nuns that you might imagine. They are assassins, and it follows a young girl named Nona Gray who her parents got killed. She was orphaned, and she ends up at this convent, Sweet Mercy Convent, and is trained in the way of the nuns. There are the Red Sisters, the Grey Sisters, and the Holy Sisters, and the Red Sisters specialize in combat, the Grey Sisters in poisons, and the Holy Sisters in both spirituality and this thing called walking the path, where you you basically imagine your spiritual self on this tightrope, and you gain power from how far you can walk on the tightrope through this meditation. And all of these characters live in a world or on a planet called Abath, where there's ice everywhere and only a really narrow corridor of green where everyone can live, and the ice is slowly shrinking. And what I love about this book is I think Mark Lawrence does a great job of writing female characters. Nona is super interesting. She's very morally gray. Her relationships with the other nuns and her friends are very interesting and heartwarming at some times. I just loved the focus on women and the amazing things that women can do when they work together. And I still remember the first sentence of the first book, which I don't think I can say the same for any other book. And that line is, "It is important when killing a nun to bring an army of sufficient size. For Sister Thorn of the Sweet Mercy Convent, Lano Tasses brought 200 men." And I think that just perfectly displays the power of the nuns in this series. This really powerful man is going to make an attack on the convent, and he's like, "Oh shit, I gotta bring all this huge army to face these little nuns." And yeah, it's a great series. Mark Lawrence's prose is absolutely fantastic throughout all of his work, but this is my favorite of his series, and I love all of the mysteries and all of the reveals throughout. Number 7 on my list is the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. This follows kind of a ragtag team of characters who are trying to defeat the evil Lord Ruler in a world where volcanoes are spewing ash everywhere, and they all get their powers from different types of metals. So people can swallow basically vials of metals, and that gives them different sorts of powers, but only for as long as they can actually burn the metal in their bloodstream. And this series is just fantastic. I love Vin. I love all of the characters. The mystery, as with all Brandon Sanderson books, is just fantastic. The famed Sanderlanche, where everything builds up to this giant avalanche of reveals at the end of the book. And I love books with huge plot twists and huge reveals, and that definitely is the case in the Mistborn series. The only reason why it's not ranked higher is because I just never really felt compelled to reread these. They were fantastic and I cried when I read them, but since they're a little bit more dense, I just don't find them to have huge rereadability, my personal tastes. And so yeah, that's why it ended up at number 7, but it's a great series and my favorite of Brandon Sanderson's for sure. Then at number 6, people are gonna judge me for this, but my number 6 favorite series of all time is the Warrior Cats series, and I just grabbed a random one from my shelf. I think this is in like the second arc, but that's the one I'm gonna hold. And this series was so formulative for me as a kid. I role-played as warriors. I've cried over this series probably as much as I've cried over any of the other books on this list. There's just something so human, especially about the first arc. The first arc is by far the best and has the tightest plotting, the most intrigue, and it's all about a group of feral cats living in the woods and their relationships with other clans and with each other. And the reason why I say that this series is so good is because the cats have such a short lifespan compared to humans. When you read most other books, you're only following characters through, you know, a year, 2, maybe 3 years of their life, and so you don't get to see like everything that happens to them. There's something so sorrowful and hopeful about the cats, seeing them from birth to death. Obviously, you know, they're always fighting with each other. There's disease, there's sickness, there's human activity that causes them to die, and just the amount of death in that first arc is insane. It's literally like Cat Game of Thrones. And so even though it's written for children, it just will always hold a special place in my heart, and I have reread them many times throughout my life and probably will continue to do so, especially with the first arc. So that is why Warriors ranks at number 6. Then at number 5, getting halfway there, we have the Graceling Realms series. I absolutely loved the Graceling, the first book, when it came out. It's set in a fantasy world where characters' eye color gives them a different sort of magic power, and the main character in the first book, Katsa, thinks that her gift is basically death because she's really good at killing people, and so the king uses her to be his executioner, and it turns out that her gift is actually survival, and so the only reason why she's so good at killing people is because it's a form of self-defense, and she's just a very cool character. I love her relationship with Poe. I love Poe in general, and I did read the entire rest of the series, which is Fire and Bitterblue, and then the 2 new releases, Winterkeep and Sea Sparrow. I didn't love Winterkeep, but I loved Sea Sparrow. I cried multiple times. There's just something about Kristen Cashore's characters that are also relatable, and I know people did not love Bitter Blue quite as much, but Bitter Blue is probably one of my favorite characters in this entire series, and I loved the cozy complexity, the political intrigue of her book. I just love all of the characters and the world and their interactions with each other, and I think Kristen Cashore created something really special that I will always love. Then at number 4, we have the slightly less well-known Rooks and Ruin series by Melissa Caruso. I read the first book, The Obsidian Tower, a few years ago, I think during COVID lockdown, because I was working retail and I basically had to sit in this closet and answer phones and do like curbside pickup, and I remember finishing this book in the closet at work. And this whole series is just so D&D coded. I don't even play D&D, but the vibes are peak kind of bright fantasy, like dark things happen, but all of the characters, you know, very found family, were kind of adventurers doing this together. I loved that energy, and I absolutely love the main character. Her name is Rix, and the first book is a little slow. I didn't love the first book, but the rest of the series is fantastic. Rix is the warden of this tower called Gloamingard, which is like her family's keep, and she's not allowed to touch anyone because everyone she touches, she kills, and the only lesson that they're taught as the wardens of this castle are never open the door to the tower. And of course, the door to the tower gets opened, and a bunch of like political people from different nations come, and there's this, you know, this first book is very political drama-y, and Rick's kind of trying to figure out her power and who she is and what she's done affects the world. And then these next 2 books are just straight action. Like, it's just all the characters trying to deal with the consequences of everything that happened in this first book, and everything is just so exciting, so well written. I love like the evil, or the, I can't spoil too much, but the evil forces in these books are very entertaining and interesting, and there's a ton of great twists, and all of the characters are really good, and I definitely recommend it. You might have to push through this first book a little bit, but the rest of the series is well worth it. Now, my number 3 favorite series, I'm cheating a little bit because it is The Will of the Many, which is only 1 book so far, but it will be a series, but I've only read the first book because the rest of the books are not out yet. But I loved this book so much that I know that I will love the rest of the series, and so it just absolutely had to make this list. This is basically a fantasy version of the Roman Republic, and power system is set up like a pyramid, so the people at the bottom of the pyramid and on next levels of the pyramid are ceding their life force to the people on the level of the pyramid above them, which keeps the people at the very top of the pyramid powerful and in control, and the people at the bottom of the pyramid weak and ceding their life force. And it's your typical like main character is a teenage boy whose family was killed and now wants revenge, and you'd think, oh yes, I've seen that 1,000 times. But the thing that makes this book so special is that he works within the system to enact revenge. He has multiple opportunities throughout the book to join the rebellion forces, but he doesn't like their methods, and so he says, I don't agree with the way that you're doing this, so I'm going to do this my own way. And I love that his first instinct is never toward violence. Like, he's trying to basically become one of them to kind of make it crumble from the inside without just deciding to go and like blow a bunch of stuff up with a bunch of strange powers. And there's this huge big mystery about why all these old technologies have been left behind from something called the Cataclysm, and just the things that are revealed throughout this book are so crazy, and the ending is so crazy, and I love the characters. The plot is so good. It's like 700 pages long, and I was never bored a single time, so that is why it will be my 3rd ranking on this list, even though the rest of the books are not out yet. Then at number 2, we have the All Souls series by Deborah Harkness. This first book, A Discovery of Witches, is probably one of my favorite books of all time. I mean, I don't know why I said that, because obviously it is if I ranked the series number 2, but this book individually as well is probably also in like the 1 or 2 spot for my favorite single book of all time. This is a world, it's like a magical realism kind of book where there's demons and witches and vampires living alongside humans, and the main character, Diana Bishop, is a witch, but she's also a scholar, and while working at Oxford, she ends up recalling a magical manuscript, and by doing so kind of of unleashes a force of energy on the world that's felt by all of the other creatures in the vicinity, and this manuscript is supposed to tell them the secrets behind their creation. And since they're all losing their powers very slowly throughout time, they all want to know how they can become more powerful and keep their, like, you know, creaturehood alive, basically. And so they all want that manuscript from Diana, and she ends up falling in love with a vampire, and they're trying to unravel the secrets of their creation together and all of this stuff. And this is probably one of my favorite romantic relationships of all time, definitely. This book is dense, it's slow, it's detailed. I see why people hate it. I see why people hate the romantic relationship. I understand. The intellectual in me completely understands. The modern woman in me completely understands, but I will never not be obsessed with this series. And I just finished rereading this book because I started watching the TV show and I wanted to do a video on it, and I am so utterly obsessed. I can't believe that it took me 11 years to reread it from the first time that I read it, but it will now probably be an every few year reread for me. I just love it so much. It speaks to something in me that I don't totally understand and can't explain, but the perfect combination of historical and scholarly and alchemical and science and romance all together make it my second favorite series of all time. Now, I will admit, I am perhaps also cheating a little bit with my number one series of all time, and that is because it's not one series, but three. And the reason why I did this is because I could not decide which one I liked better than the other, and also I didn't want it to take up 3 spots on my list because they're all by the same author in the same world, so it basically feels like one series. And that author is Tamara Pierce, and that world is Tortall, and this is by far my favorite series of all time, and that includes the Alana series, the Dane series, and the Kell series. Every time I reread one of these series individually, I'm like, oh yeah, that's my favorite. Then I'll reread the next one. Oh yeah, that's my favorite. Then I'll reread the next one. Yeah, that's my favorite. And I just have never been able to decide which one I actually like the best, so they're all gonna be ranked first. I read these for the first time when I was probably 11 or 12, and I've reread them probably every year since. Tamara Pierce is just an icon of strong female characters. Alana is a girl who goes undercover in medieval times to become a knight because she doesn't want to be a lady, she wants to be a knight, and that follows her through ages like 11 to 20 something, and all of the barriers that she faces and the world-ending plots that she tries to subvert. And I just love her so much, and all of the characters and the academy, the training, the female knights. It's just all spectacularly done. Then we have Dane, who is a young woman who has wild magic, and so she can speak to animals, turn into animals, and her trainer basically is a mage named Numair, and Dane and Numair also rank probably in my favorite romantic relationships of all time, and I absolutely love their story too. And then we have Kell, who is the first female knight to become a knight, not having to disguise herself as a boy, and Kell is very calm and quiet as opposed to Alana's very fiery nature, and she's a great leader and all of her friends are amazing. And what I love about the Kell series so much is that it slows down the knight training a lot, whereas in Alana's book, like, she becomes a knight by the end of the second book, and so all of her pagehood, her squirehood is all very condensed, and so we don't get a ton of detail, and then the Kell series kind of goes in and fills in that detail, and so I just love the detailedness of the Kell books. And I really don't think anything is ever going to replace the Tamara Pierce Tortall world as my number one series, because it's just something that had such a massive impact not only on my life, but my writing, my reading choices, just everything. And I reread them so frequently, and I don't think anything will ever surpass that. So what do you think of my top 10? Is there anything that you've read that is also in your top 10? I know it was kind of a strange mix of books I've read as an adult and books I've read as a kid, but I don't think children's literature has any less value than adult literature, or that it can have any less impact on us, so I wanted to be very well-rounded and broad in ranking my top 10 series. Thanks for watching. Bye!